Right, so we have a pretty interesting report from 9to5Mac that says that Apple's working on a new A15X SoC that could be going into future iPads and potentially the next iPad Air. Now this initially does not make a ton of sense, but let's delve into the report and also delve into why I do think there is a chance this actually could be plausible. And so without further ado, make sure to like and subscribe for the latest Apple news and rumors, and with that being said, let's just suck in. Right, so the source of the information, 9to5Mac, have a 78% accuracy rating, so yes, as weird as the information is, we can trust it, since it is coming from a pretty accurate source. But anyways, delving in, this A15X tidbit was mentioned in their report regarding the iPad mini 5 getting the A15, and that to an extent does make sense, but the A15X story is what's a little confusing. So basically, in case you don't know, the M1 we have in the iPad Pro and the Max are based on the A14, they're based on the A14 cores, and so that's why the iPad Pro has the M1, because essentially it's the A14X this year's iPad was gonna get. And so that's where my confusion arises regarding this A15X, because wouldn't the A15X theoretically be the M2? And so yes, initially I was a little puzzled because it makes no sense to have an A15X and the M2 together when they're identical in terms of chip layout, performance, and pretty much everything. But of course, I do have a few theories on how this could make sense, and that begins with the fact that maybe the iPad Pro is moving back to the A series chips. Now this is the least likely out of my theories, but I do want to say that M1 in the iPad Pro this year created a ton of expectations for the iPad and its future, because I remember everyone getting gassed about the M1 in the iPad and how this could definitely mean we're getting pro apps on the iPad. Yeah, that did not really work out, but anyways, because Apple put the M1 in the iPad, a lot of consumers had this notion that the iPad was gonna become much like the Mac, and so when iPadOS 15 did not deliver on that, a lot of people were disappointed, and so maybe Apple's realized that hey, M1 in the iPad gave us a lot of negative reception, and so why don't we just go back to the A series chips so that there is a clear distinction between the iPad and the Mac. Now that is somewhat valid, but I do want to say that Apple probably doesn't care about our expectations because they never promised anything regarding the software on the iPad. We just started assuming things because of the M1 in the iPad Pro, and so I don't think they care about the negative reception they got from the tech community because we are a very small portion of their customers. And so yes, the backlash for M1 in the iPads does not mean Apple's gonna backtrack and go back to the A series on the iPad Pro. Also, do remember, marketing wise, the iPad Pro getting M1 and then going to A15X can be seen as a downgrade, because for those who aren't very tech savvy, they have no idea that the M1 is based on the A14X. They just know M1 as the Mac chip, and so I'm assuming it was pretty impressive to most that Apple put a computer chip in the iPad Pro. That sounds absolutely insane to average consumers, even though we know M1 is based on Apple's A series chips. And so to go from a computer chip to, of course, the A15X, which sounds less special and of course most know as a slightly beefier version of the iPhone chip, sounds way less impressive even if the performance is gonna be pretty similar. So what's the next possibility? Well, this could be an internal name for the M2 because obviously, like I said, M1 is essentially the A14X, and so the M2 is also essentially the A15X. And so it's possible that internally they're referring to this as the A15X, and that's what 9to5Mac sources have heard. So yes, while A15X could be the internal name, I'm sure the official name will be the M2 in the iPad Pro. But guys, I have a bizarre theory that could make sense, and that is the A15X comes to the next generation iPad Air. So yes, I know this might initially seem completely absurd, but hear me out. I think Apple wants to align the iPad range with the Mac range, because isn't it a little weird that the highest end iPad Pro comes with the M1, which is the entry-level chip in the Mac lineup? And so I think it's possible that maybe the next iPad Pros get either the M1X or the M2X, basically whatever chip we see in the next MacBook Pros, and then the M2 in the MacBook Air comes over to the iPad Air in the form of the A15X. That seems pretty likely to me, I can't lie, because if Apple's going to use the same suffixes across both ranges, then why not make the chip offerings uniform across the lineup and basically give us similar performance, and simply the only deciding factor would be the form factor and the software. Now yes, I know some of you guys might say the iPad Pro getting the M1X or the M2X might not be good for power consumption since M1X and M2X are way more powerful SoCs, and the iPads are very small tablets in comparison to the MacBooks, and so yes, maybe Apple's going to wait for those larger iPads we've been hearing about to of course start sharing those powerful Mac chips on the iPad platform. And so that basically ruins my theory, right? Well, yeah, kinda, but I do have another backup theory, and that is regarding the A15X not being comparable to the M2 and instead becomes a mid-range option between the A15 and the M2. So in case you don't know, the A15 is supposed to be very similar to the A14 in terms of chip layout, so a 6-core CPU and a 4-core GPU. Now of course M2 should have an 8-core CPU and up to 10 GPUs, and so there is space for a mid-range option, and so maybe Apple reuses the A15X name and gives it to a chip that should be better than the A15 of course, but won't be as good as the M2 in the iPad Pro and the MacBook Air. My theory is A15X could have a 6-core CPU and an 8-core GPU, so it's going to have the same single-core performance as the A15, but of course it's going to have a much beefier GPU, but it won't be as good as the one in the M2. I do think this makes a ton of sense because the iPad Air 5 is going to be a pretty hard sell if it has the same identical chip to the iPad Mini 6, which is going to be cheaper and of course won't be that much smaller now with the new design. And so yes, Apple could give the iPad Air 5 a power advantage over the iPad Mini 6. So yeah, those are my thoughts on this report, but let me know your thoughts in the comments below and whether you agree or disagree with the theories I presented. Anyways, thank you for watching, make sure to like and subscribe for the latest Apple news and rumors. Check out the video in the icon above on details regarding the iPad 9, and on that note, I'll see you guys in the next one. See ya peeps.